Shalom Chaverim, New Year 2026, back at their Nister. And today is Parashat Vayechi, and we're going to do it together with really one of my favorite philosophers, characters, thinkers, figures in Jewish thought, Israeli thought, and this is the late Yeshayahu Leibowitz. So let's jump right in with the Leibowitz quote. The state has no intrinsic value, only an instrumental value. This principle is common to both the religious, the theocentric approach, and the humanist, the anthropocentric approach. Attributing to the state an intrinsic value is the essence of the fascist approach. So I'm going to elaborate on this later. And Yeshayahu Leibowitz was an Orthodox Jew, a keeper of the halakha, but he was also a scientist, a neuroscientist nonetheless, and taught science in the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And he was also a Torah commentator. He was an avid scholar of the Rambam, of Maimonides. He's the brother of Nechama Leibowitz, who's the known and beloved Torah commentator. And he was also a great polymath in the sense that he really commented on actual events, on current events in Israel, and was really what we would call the raging prophet of our times, accusing the Israeli government with really not handling things to his liking. And some of his predictions or prophecies, especially those that were made in the 60s, are very, very chilling to read today because they are kind of coming true. And please feel free to search more if you want to learn more about Yeshayahu Leibowitz. Online you can find a lot of videos as well as articles, and his books are available everywhere. So I'm bringing Leibowitz today because of actually the Haftarah of this week's portion, Vayechi. So first of all, what is Vayechi about? Vayechi is the last portion in the book of Genesis. So it ends the book of Genesis, and it also closes the entire saga of Joseph, right? So the entire story with Joseph and his brother, selling him to be a slave in Egypt, etc., until at the end they reconcile, and Joseph, of course, is up there as second to the king. And in our portion that also ends the book of Genesis, this whole story comes to an end, and it really ends with the death of Jacob and then the death of Joseph in Egypt. And right before Jacob's death, Jacob actually calls all of his sons. It's important to mention that he does not call his daughter, Dinah, but he does call all of his sons to bless them before he dies, which is also kind of a literary irony here, since Jacob actually cheated his brother from getting the blessing from Isaac before Isaac's death, and now he's making sure that all of his children, all of the 12 children, are actually getting the blessing. And he blesses them with really beautiful words, and each and every one with commenting on their characters and giving them wishes, and even a little bit of rebuke here and there about who they are, but really honoring their individuality. And for those of you who may not know, a little reminder: what is a Haftarah? Haftarah is basically a segment from the Book of Prophets, and our sages basically wanted to pair some segments from the Book of Prophets to Torah reading to get a little prophets in there, right? It's also a part of our canon, of our books, of our traditions. And the way to do it was to choose a segment which thematically related to the Torah portion to read along with it. So since this Torah portion is about blessings before you die to your children, our sages chose the Haftarah to be the blessing that King David gives his son King Solomon before he dies. Now here, we don't really have a blessing, but really the last words of David to Solomon before he dies, kind of last instructions. What really stands out is that as opposed to the beautiful blessings that Jacob gives his children in our Torah portion, in the Haftarah, the words that David has for his son Solomon could have been taken from the Godfather, because it's really all about cleaning table or wiping the board clean, or however you want to say it, but basically a kill list of political rivals and tips of how to stabilize Solomon's rule without risking any rebellion, and really a little bit of sweet revenge here and there. And I'm going to give you an example. So the head of his military, Yoav ben Tzruya, who actually suppressed the biggest rebellion against David, is dealt with. And the exact words are, ועשית כחוכמתך ולא תורד שיבתו בשלום שאול. Basically, David tells his son Solomon, you're smart, do what you can, so Yoav doesn't die of old age. This is basically what it means. And then some people deserve favor because they were actually on the right side of the rebellion. So he says, ולבני ברזילי הגלעדי תעשה חסד והיו באוכלי שולחניך כי כן קרבו אליי בבורחים מפני אבשלום אחיך. So he says to his son, when the rebellion happens, the sons of Barzillai, they actually were close to me. When they helped me when I had to escape from Avshalom, who basically led the rebellion. And so be gracious to them. And actually it says, "V'hayu be'ochle shulchancha," invite them to a meal at your table, right? It's a very mob-like mentality here. And then he also tells him, there was some people that I promised not to hurt, but now I'm gonna die, and me is not you, so you can hurt them instead of me as a revenge. And here it says, והנה עמך שמעי בן גרה בן הימינים מבחורים, והוא קללני קללה נמרצת ביום לכתי מחניים, והוא ירד לקראתי הירדן, ושבע לו באדוני לאמור, אם עמיתך בחרב. So basically he said, so there's this guy, Shimi ben Gera, that cursed me, but I promised that I will not hurt him. ואתה אל תנקהו, כי איש חכם אתה, וידעת את אשר תעשה לו, והורדת את צוותו בדם שאול. And again, David here is very sophisticated. It doesn't tell him exactly what to do, because he promised not to hurt him, but he tells him, again, you're smart. You'll figure it out, but kind of make sure that, again, doesn't die of old age. All right, so this is the Haftarah that our sages chose to pair with Vayechi, with the Torah portion of Jacob's last words to his sons. So how does this connect to Leibowitz? In June 2003, which was exactly 100 years to the birth of Yeshayahu Leibowitz, who was born in 1903, the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute held a 3-day conference in the honor of Leibowitz. And in the opening of this conference, another Israeli philosopher named Aviezer Ravitsky shared the following story. And this is from Ravitsky's words. Years ago, I told Yeshayahu Leibowitz that there is one passage for the maftir and the reading of the Haftarah in which I ask not to read from the Torah. Not because I'm making a selection between the chapters of the Tanakh, but because I cannot identify with the chapter that is read in that Haftarah. Therefore, I cannot be a Shaliach Tzibur, which is the public reader. And this is King David's will to his son Solomon, when he commends him, see that his white hair does not go down in Sheol in peace. So basically, Ravitsky shares that he tells Leibowitz, says the one Haftarah that I refuse to read, it's so horrible. Leibovitz's response, as expected, Ravitsky says, was very surprising. And he said, This is the chapter that I love more than any other chapter in the Tanakh, because it teaches us how power corrupts. Even King David, who is known as the pleasant poet of Israel. King David is known as Na'im Zmirot Israel, so it's just like the pleasant poet of Israel. So Leibowitz says this is so important to read this Haftarah because it shows you that even this pleasant poet can be corrupt by power, and this is something that we need to remember. So before we continue with Leibowitz, I think it's worth asking, why did our sages choose this Haftarah to begin with? And maybe that choice is in and of itself commentary or interpretation of that Torah portion to basically rebuke or criticize David, to basically show how it's supposed to be done or how it's done beautifully versus what happens after power corrupts you. So maybe by pairing the two and contrasting them, our sages wanted to tell us something. So this is worth thinking about. But this story of Ravitsky really illustrates what Leibowitz, one of the things that Leibowitz really called for again and again and again, and that is the separation of religion and state in Israel. And many people who know Leibowitz mistakenly think that the reason why Leibowitz called for a separation of religion and state in Israel was in order to protect liberal values, right? So basically, in order to protect the rights of the secular Israelis who are being oppressed by religion, right? So a secular Israeli who's not observing the halakha must be stuck at home on Shabbat because there is no public transportation. Okay, so it's just like one example of religious oppression, which basically tramples liberal values. And many people think that this is why Leibowitz called for that separation. However, this was not the reason. And Leibowitz was liberal in his views, very liberal, and he always wanted to protect secular Israelis' rights. But the reason he wanted the separation of religion and state was not to protect secular Israelis, but rather to protect religion itself. And as I mentioned before, he was Orthodox and a keeper of the halakha. He was also a Zionist. And in the early 1920s, his dream, his vision of a Jewish state would be a complete halachic state, meaning a Jewish state would be a state that really enacts Jewish law. And Leibowitz understood that the halakha that is found in the Shulchan Aruch needs to be updated to meet the times of the 20th century, but that he dreamed that there would be some sort of governance that would sit and debate and rewrite those rules to fit in a new or modernized Jewish law. However, when he actually immigrated to Israel, when he actually began to live in Israel, he pretty quickly abandoned the idea. And he abandoned the idea because he realized how many secular Jews live in Israel, and such a halachic state would basically be oppressive to them. And so this would never work. So instead, what Leibowitz believed in is that the government must be entirely secular, meaning government is no more than a bureaucratic apparatus, and this is how he called it, to manage the technicalities of, safe, secure, and prosperous life in Israel. All right, so take care of taxes, of health care, of defense, but it is a bureaucratic apparatus, and it of course has no value, right? As soon as you apply or assign a value to a state, it becomes fascism. That's what he called. So what is the role of religion? Religion, according to Leibowitz, must stay separate, so it could stand in opposition to that secular government. So there will be a Jewish spirit that would constantly rebuke the actions of the government, such as the prophets of Israel have done. And as we all know, what's happening in Israel is not only a merger of religion and state, but also the existence of a religious political parties in a parliamentary democracy can be problematic, to say the least. And the existence of the religious political parties is what Leibowitz called a prostitution of religion and idolatry, nonetheless. He also describes astonishing conversation that he had with David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel and one of the founders of Israel, in which Ben-Gurion told him, "I understand why you fiercely demand the separation of religion and state, as you wish for the Jewish religion to be independent, with which the state government will have to deal, and therefore I will never agree to the separation of religion and state, because I would like for this state to have grasp over religion, to hold it in its hand." And Leibowitz responded to him and answered, "And I would like for the Jewish religion to set itself free from your grasp." So here we see that Ben-Gurion actually consciously really knew why he didn't want a religious opposition to the government, why he didn't want it to be an independent institution that he would have to answer to all the time. And really bringing electoral power, political power to religious goals was the way of Ben-Gurion to make sure that he could always deal with religion, which is very, very interesting. So I'd like to conclude with again, words from the Haftarah. So before David gives Solomon all this kill list and all those terrible instructions that he gives him, he actually starts with a couple of verses that I want to share with you that sound a little different. So it starts by saying, and I'll read it in English, "Keep the charge of the eternal, your God, walking in God's ways and following God's laws, commandments, rules, and admonitions, as recorded in the teaching of Moses, in order that you may succeed in whatever you undertake and wherever you turn. Then God will fulfill the promise that was made concerning me. If your descendants are scrupulous in their conduct and walk before me faithfully, with all their heart and soul, your line on the throne of Israel shall never end." So I think that perhaps David should have finished here. Because the rest of his instructions, as Leibowitz was saying, have nothing to do with religion or with faith. Shabbat Shalom.